All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Shelf Space. This is episode number 38. I'm Chris. I'm live from Edmonton, and as always, we have fellow co-host Charles from Montreal.
Hey, everybody.
We've got Gina from just outside the CN Tower in Toronto.
That's right.
And everyone will notice a very special guest joining us today, a very recognizable face in this collectible industry, Mr. David Igo.
Welcome.
All right, so we're very happy to have you on the show today, David. We're just going to quickly, I'll run through what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about how the heck you ended up in the statue industry or a collectible industry. We'll talk about your new role with Tweeterhead. You just started with them last year, I believe it was. We're going to get into a special topic, very important to me, Masters of the Universe statues. We'll talk about some of David's favorite projects along or throughout the years and where he sees this collectibles industry going. So, not to waste any more time, we'll kick things off. Gina, why don't you start us off today?
Okay, hi. So thank you so much for joining us, Dave.
Thank you for having me.
In terms of the background, I think it's safe to say that, most people don't grow up wanting to be an artistic director. They probably don't even know what that is. So can you just sort of start off by saying just telling us what you wanted to do when you were growing up, and then how your journey led you to become an artistic director?
Yeah. Like you said, when you're a kid, I'm from Colorado Springs, which is like a very conservative town it's a big city in the United States, but art wasn't like a thing there. Lots of like, be a doctor, be a lawyer, all the normal like successful career stuff. But my parents were super supportive. I was drawing since, I was a kid, but I remember in Colorado, I think it was my 4th grade class, we had a guest lecturer, like not lecturer because it's like elementary school, but they came in and it was this guy from this art school. And he showed us how to draw Batman using like circles and squares and triangles and basic shapes. I was like, what? Like at the first intro to learning how to draw basically proper. Because as a kid, I was just like, monsters and dinosaurs, which is cool. But then this is like structured drawing. So that just blew my mind. And I was just drawing, because that's what he showed us to draw, was a buff Batman. So I was drawing buff dudes like round the clock because I knew, all right, circle, square, triangle, muscles, that's like all I drew. And my parents saw I was taking it pretty seriously, so they, signed me up for some classes at that place. And so I took classes off and on, through elementary and junior high and high school. I just kept drawing all the time. And eventually, like at the end of high school, when you're trying to like, what are you going to do in college? What's going to be your career? I didn't know. I just knew I loved drawing. I loved cartoons. So I was like, animation, I guess? Like, is at the time, right when I was finishing high school, that's like right when the comic collapse was happening. So I was like late 90s, early 2000s, everything was crashing. So I was like, all right, I want to get into comics. I was buying, so what kind of like a precursor to statues was, I was a huge toy collector. I was a Mcfarland toy nerd. I have like my wall back home. My mom is awesome. She keeps my bedroom the same way, so it's Mcfarland Toys on the wall in the package. I would buy Spawn with green eyes, Spawn with blue eyes, Spawn with blue eyes with a red cape, or Spawn with blue eyes with a green cape. I have to get them all, So I was like that guy with Mcfarland Toys. So
the Mcfarland Toys were so ahead of the game.
They were.
When Todd Toys, I think that's what they were first called, and they were better than anything that was coming out at the time.
Yeah.
So.
I think my first one I got was like Series 2. So Series 1 was like kind of like the Kenner-like figures, and I just missed that. And they're still like on the shelf, but I was like into, I think Clown 2 and Redeemer were like 2 of my first like.
Redeemer was such a cool character.
He's so cool, that cross on his face, just like metal, like sword arm. I was like, what? Like,
I know.
I was huge into Spawn. So like Spawn, everything. I like bought. I think I jumped in when it was like right after issue 32. So whenever that came out, or like issue 29 or 32, but it was like, what? And I went back and like bought all the previous. And at that time, I think issue 1 was going for $20. I couldn't afford it, so I'm like, I got to get a job. So I got a job like pizza.
That's more than it goes for today. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. But at the time, it was like the hot thing. I didn't have any money, so I was like, in junior high, I was too young to work. So I was like, as soon as I turned 15, I got a job at Domino's Pizza to like answer phones, and they're like, we're gonna pay you $5.15 an hour, and I was like, yes, money, So anyways, long story short, love toys, love comics, love drawing. End of high school came, and I'm like, comics aren't really like booming right now, so I was like, my art teacher was like, you should do animation. So I applied to Cal Arts, which is like one of the famous, like most famous animation schools. Got denied, and so I applied to a local school in Denver, Colorado, and got accepted there. So I'm like, I guess I'm staying local. Went there, and it was like their animation program was like so new that it wasn't like traditional, we're going to teach you to be a Disney animator. They're like, all right, you're going to draw, animate, you're going to do claymation, you're going to take sand on glass. And I was like, what? Like, what? I don't want. So it was 3 years of like experimenting. And then they're like, and now we're going to teach you Maya, which is like a 3D modeling program. And the problem was when we were trying to learn 3D animation, we had a person who didn't know the program teaching us the program. So it's like super intimidating. I was like, I just want to draw. This program stuff is hard. But then when you graduate that school, I'm like, sweet, did a 3-year program. I have a portfolio, I think. I went to Comic-Con in 2000. I think that was 2004. I went to my first Comic-Con. Went out by myself, got a hotel. My parents gave me a little money to get a hotel, but I paid for everything else my own because of the Domino's money. And I went to Comic-Con, and that's when I first met, because of the DeviantArt days, when DeviantArt was still big, and it still got a little bit of life, but I knew some people from online. So I knew Sean Galloway, who goes by Cheeks. I knew Kari Randolph, who's been a lot, like, they were both great. When I showed up, let's go, Dave, let's go and introduce you to people. I was like, awesome. So it was cool. But then, I wasn't getting any work. So I was like, dang it, what am I going to do? So I went to I hopped around LA for a little bit, went to another convention, heard about this school called Vancouver Film School, and they offered a 1-year program, like 1 year in and out, and we have high job placement. You'll learn the 3D animation because 2D animation was dying at that time.
It was the future, right? You felt the buzz in the air that you needed to know 3D animation, need to be able to use a computer to draw. To create.
To make stuff. So I was like, oh, dang. So I felt like I want to get into comics. Comics is impossible to get into because it was crashing. Want to get into animation. Animation was crashing. All right. Next, try 3D stuff. Went to Vancouver Film School for a year. Did another 4-month extension program. Loved it. Focused on 3D modeling. I want to be a modeler for like Weta or ILM because I love making creatures. And so I focused on a 3D modeling portfolio. Graduated. Went back to Comic-Con. Had a portfolio with me that had that and my drawing stuff in it, and I met the owner of Gentle Giant Studios, Carl Meyer, and he was the first one to offer me a job. I'm 6'3", and he's a tall guy, and he's like, "Do you play basketball?" I'm like, "Yeah, I play basketball." He's like, "Sweet, and you draw? We need a guy that draws and plays basketball." So I'm like, "Awesome!" So that was my first.
That's your first break.
Yeah, I kind of lied my way into it because he's like, do you know Gentle Giant? And I just went by the booth earlier that day, but I was into Mcfarland Toys. I didn't know statues. I didn't buy statues other than I knew of Bowen. Bowen was really the big one for me, and Claiborne Moore and stuff like that. But DC Collectibles, I think, was in their earlier days too.
There was graffiti designs at the time.
What? Oh, so it was graffiti. That's when you mentioned graffiti earlier, I didn't know what they were. So graffiti turned into DC?
Yeah. Then DC said, you know what? Why don't we do our own thing?
Oh, cool.
Right?
So I became familiar with DC when they first started the black and white statue series and the women of DC bust with Adam Hughes, the Wonder Woman and the Power Girl and all those pieces. So I ran by Gentle Giant's booth earlier in the con before I met Carl, the owner, and I saw they did these dragons from Disney. They did kind of realistic versions of the Disney dragons. They did the Matrix bus. I was like, and then I saw they did Lord of the Rings stuff, and I loved Lord of the Rings. I was like, I could work at a place like this. So Carl came by, met me, looked at my portfolio, offered me a job, and offered to help me get out to LA and start a job. So yeah, designer at Gentle Giant, working on statues. And
so you were really there, when it was just about to boom, and you see the potential, right? When statues first came out, okay. You could see that there was room for improvement, but you weren't looking at it like that. You were seeing the potential.
Yeah, I
And
think I was like, honestly, I think I was like, I need a job and this is art. I can get paid drawing. I wasn't really thinking of like, not yet, but like once you're kind of ingrained in it, then you start thinking of like, all right, this is where we're at. Where's the next place we can go? Right now, I just graduated school and I need a job. So that was my like, I need to get paid, you know? So that was cool.
To doing things that you love to do. And not only that, it's like going back to school too. It's continuing education.
Yeah.
And, you know, no one was at the peak of their field at the time. Everyone was learning as they were going along.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Right? So that's what was really unique about this industry at that time, how everyone was kind of like talking to one another. Hey, have you heard about this program? Here, let me show you something I just learned. The tricks of the trade, there weren't any. People were learning them as they were going along.
Yeah,
so it's really cool to be part of it.
At the time, things are so mostly like when I was in college and graduating and applying for a job, it was like Bowen was all still super sculpty and, you know, styrene and wax and like less wax. I think most Bowen sculptors were like, you know, super sculpty because that's what Randy worked in. And then some worked in wax, and Mcfarland Toys was wax based. But when I worked at Gentle Giant, got my job at Gentle Giant, that's when I saw like they were huge into 3D scanning technology, digital tools. And I was like, I went to school for 3D animation. They have these digital tools I can draw. They need me drawing. So that's like where all that stuff kind of like came together. And that's when, you know, after working there for a little bit, I was looking at like what the future definitely could be and where it could go. And that's the early days of digital versus traditional.
Right,
like,
absolutely. The war began, right?
I can see thumbprints in it and stuff. And it's like, come on, you know, like just a tool. And that's a whole nother talk. That's like, to me, tools are tools. Artists are artists, and what tools you use and the objective, the end result is the goal, you know?
How long did you stay at Gentle Giant?
I was there for 3 years before another 3 Comic-Cons later, I ran into an old coworker, and he worked at Sideshow, and he's like, hey, we're looking for a designer. I was like, sweet, I've been here for 3 years. I feel like I've kind of reached the peak of what I could do at Gentle Giant, you know, because they had hire people there that were, they're all cool. I loved working there, but at the end of the day, it felt like I was kind of like stuck at a certain
You're plateauing. Was Gentle Giant already doing their Star Wars busts line at this point?
Oh yeah, when I came on, their Star Wars was kind of like their main like licensed product thing. So yeah, because they had Gentle Giant at the time. It was Gentle Giant Ltd, which was like Star Wars bus, and then Gentle Giant Studios, which was like 3D scanning, making prototypes for other companies and stuff like that. It was like service and then licensed.
Gotcha. You know, the numbers that Gentle Giant Star Wars busts were getting, not only from aftermarket, but edition sizes, were unbelievable. We don't see anything like that today.
Yeah, it was nuts. It was like some pieces were like 10,000. I was like, what? Like just 10,000 of something existing somewhere was like.
I have the Gentle Giant Darth Vader, and I believe it's 20,000.
Oh, the original where you stand there like this and on the rectangular base.
And he's holding a lightsaber.
Yeah. Joe Jung sculpted that. Joe is awesome. He's a great friend. Worked with him at Gentle Giant. Did a little work with him at Sideshow. I think he works at Inesco now. So yeah, he's awesome.
Were you there when the Deadpool on Vespa was made?
I left right before they got the Marvel license. So it was because I think Deadpool on Vespa, I think that was Will Harbottle who sculpted that. Yeah. So Will's awesome. He eventually came to Sideshow too, and
he's easily one of the best. Like
that's probably one of my favorite. And that's one of my favorite Gentle Giant pieces. That and the Black Widow.
And the which one?
And the Black Widow.
She's standing on a white cube, a transparent cube.
Yeah, those are both done. Like I think right after I left, that's right when they started to make those like jumbo Star Wars Kenner toys, like taking the original Kenners and blowing them up to 12 inches, and then the Marvel license. So when I was there, I was working mainly on. It was weird because I did like a lot of everything. I did like for their service company, I did DVD case designs for like, hey, you know, here's a Blu-ray deluxe case, and we want to have it have this sculpted element. I would help them design that stuff. I would design Star Wars minibus, Lord of the Rings minibus, Harry Potter reviews. Worked on a couple of video games and worked on a couple of feature films. They had they got to do some feature film design work. Like I got to work on Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland for 4 months doing initial character design stuff, which was like a dream job. I'm like, wow.
That is a dream job. That's a visual orgasm. Tim Burton.
Dude, I got to spend like 2 weeks drawing Jabberwockies. I mean, that was like my oh my god, just it was awesome.
So when you went over to Sideshow, you were saying you were a designer, so you weren't like they didn't hire you as a director right away. Something you fell into later on.
Yeah, so I did. So I was hired at Gentle Giant as a designer, and they only work with freelancers. So I was Gentle Giant's first like in-house designer, and then I was Sideshow's first in-house designer, which is kind of like, it's kind of weird thinking like how that worked out timing wise and everything. But they worked with some freelancers. Joe Allard, who's awesome. He was a freelancer, but he lived a certain distance away, and he wanted to keep his like freelance lifestyle. So they were like, hey, we need someone in-house. So they offered him the job, and then when he's like, I like freelance, I'm going to stick with freelance, they hired me, and I worked with Joe Allard initially. So he was like their senior designer. I was their like new designer. And then I worked with Seth Rinaldi, who was the design manager at the time, and Tom Gilland, who was the creative director. So I was like the 4-person design team at the time. So
wow, that's great.
Yeah.
So how did you get to the to become a director? Like, how did that transition?
It wasn't like ever like I didn't really know it would go there. It was just like I started there designing, and then eventually, there's more design work to be done. So I was like, hey, I know Chris like Dave, we need a designer. Do you know anyone? I'm like, Chris Anka is like this guy I know. They hired Chris Anka for a year, and then he went back to CalArts. He went to school, and then then we kept hiring other people. So they're just like, hey, if Chris is going back, let's hire this guy Walter O'Neill. So they hired Walter. And then we started freelancing more artists because Walter and I were doing a lot of the design work. And then we need to do more. So I was kind of like, I know, like, what about this guy? What about this guy? So we kept working with more designers. I was kind of like coordinating, doing mostly coordination and managing with a little design work.
So you suddenly became like a go-to person, not only for the work itself, but also for people that you knew.
Kind of. I mean, I'm just a socialite. I go to conventions and I meet people. I like talking a lot, and it sits in my head. And they're like, we need someone I think in my Rolodex of people I've met, whether I know them well or I don't know them that well at all. I just remember like, oh, that guy's a sculptor. Let's look at this guy. After I left Gentle Giant, they let go of a bunch of their traditional sculptors. So when Sideshow's like, we need some more sculptors, I'm like, there's this whole me and now is Matt Black. His name was Matt Elward at the time, but Matt Black and I were ex-Gentle Giant people. We're like, dude, there's all these Gentle Giant people that need jobs. So we started working.
Right.
With Steve Schumacher was one of the people let go that they hired on, and he's the guy that did his first projects were like the Venture Brothers maquettes and the stylized cartoony stuff because he did a lot of the Clone Wars statues at Gentle Giant. So they hired him to do that. The first J. Scott Campbell piece, I think he did. And a bunch of other stuff. So
Sinestro.
Sinestro. I love his Sinestro.
Yeah.
So that's one of my favorite anatomical. I have it in the kitchen. I love that thing. Yeah.
Great piece.
Cool stuff. See, this is a side question. So you are a Zed brusher yourself. I mean, you've taught courses, right?
It's funny hearing you say it because that kind of weirded me out too. Going to Vancouver Film School, my first day in a 3D class, they're like, "All right, your X, Y, and Z coordinates." I was like, "Z?" Like what? But sorry, but so with sorry, I don't. It's cool. You say it either way. It's just like always funny hearing it. But with ZBrush, when I got hired at Gentle Giant, when I was just graduating Vancouver Film School. ZBrush 2.0 had just come out, so there weren't any classes around it. So my last 4 months at Vancouver Film School, it was brand new, and everyone's like, "What is this thing?" Right? I get a job at Gentle Giant. I know some 3D modeling. I know how to draw, and they're like, "Hey, we're signed up for this thing called ETP, which is kind of like a California government thing where you can, if your company signed up, you can take essentially government paid for classes." So I was like, they're teaching ZBrush at this place. I could take it for free. So I signed up for ZBrush classes, learned it at this place called Studio Arts. And I took it through every single time because I didn't have my own computer at home. I was still saving up money and all this stuff. So I didn't have a computer at home. So I'm like, if I can just keep going to this place, taking free classes, I can use their computers. And eventually, they offered me a job teaching there on the side. They're like, hey, do you want to be a TA? It's like, yeah, like now I'm going to get paid to be here. That's awesome. So I started TAing there. And then eventually, I learned it good enough. And a lot of the people I knew at Gentle Giant that were let go, that were traditional sculptors, I started teaching them like on the side to help them out because, I want to make sure they could get jobs. And they eventually offered me a teaching job, and that's how I learned ZBrush was really at Studio Arts. So
it's interesting how you came full circle, right?
Yeah.
It's you started as a student, not sure what this is, but I know there's a future in it. Next thing you know, you become one of the pioneers in the field, where you're now teaching the next generation. There are people who want this. I know you're not going to take this well, but I'm going to say it anyway. There are people who want to be you.
Yep.
Right?
Well, thank you. It's because of the hair. I know.
Well, think about it, right? And we're going to lead right into this. I mean, you worked at Gentle Giant, you worked at Sideshow, you had a lot of success there. At one point, your name was synonymous with Sideshow, right? And then here you are. You're now working with Tweeterhead.
Yeah.
So
cool.
How did that come around?
So I was at Sideshow for just shy of 10 full years. It was always weird thinking your 10-year anniversary. It's like when you finish your 10th year. So I was just shy. I was 6 months shy of finishing my 10th year. Sideshow was going in a different direction than, and I had been there for 10 years. I think they were looking for fresh ideas and everything, and they could tell I wanted to do something different. So it was kind of like a mutual split from Sideshow. And there, when I was telling people, hey, I'm, kind of like a free agent, I knew Chad. Chad and I became friendly because of a mutual connection and because of the Sideshow connection. And, a
mutual interest, a mutual love for this particular art form.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, he's a fanboy turned producer turned company. So he started out making kits of I think some of the earliest stuff he did was either his original Kimba or he worked with Tony McVeigh on those original monsters he did. But it was kind of he was in the garage kit business, and then eventually became when he did his first Kimba as a pre-painted produced piece. It was Statue Company, which is nuts. And he's done a great job for being basically, it's weird, not a one-man operation because obviously works with a lot of designers and sculptors, but he project manages, art directs, ran the business side, dealt with customer service with people, just one person kind of operating a majority of this company. It was nuts.
Yeah. Tweeterhead comes up in our on our shows from time to time, and it's always for the same reason. Tweeterhead practically brought back 6 scale all on their own. And they make it very hard for you not to notice. They make it very hard for you not to go, should I go back to 6 scale? Because people kind of just gravitated towards quarter scale and stayed there for a long while.
Yeah.
And now Tweeterhead comes in and produces something that's very attractive.
Yeah.
So kudos to Tweeterhead for doing that because they weren't the first who tried, right?
Yeah.
People are going hey, don't you want smaller scale? And we're going, oh, no, we kind of like quarter scale. It's the ideal. So nobody wanted to try. And then Tweeterhead, an unknown company, well, a guy I didn't know, or I don't think we knew him.
Yeah.
He just comes out and says, you know what? I'm going to be the one who's going to take the risk. I really believe in the concept. If I build it, they will come. And that's exactly what happened. And, it's cool to see you part of that.
Yeah, I think Chad, what helped too was he didn't have this traditional business model of I have to form this company, I have to hire a bunch of employees. He was just working with a bunch of freelancers, and he didn't have a building, so his overhead was real low because he wanted to do this because he wanted to make stuff he wanted. He wanted to enjoy.
Right.
He wanted to make Mr. Mixoplick when no one else would make. No one else would make that at the time. So he's like, I just want to make this. I just want to be able to break even, and if I make some extra money, cool,
great,
kind of thing. So that's where he started, was really with the passion and not trying to I have to make money, which is great. Obviously, it's a business thing, and he grew enough to where he's like, all right, now I still want to keep making what I want to make, but now I want to expand a little bit more. Kind of at the end of the day, these licensors are, Disney bought Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm. It's Disney owns 3 of the biggest IP brands in the world. right? And it's kind of
Right.
like there's no longer like small companies that can play with like the big dogs, if that makes sense. You have to kind of like prove you can keep up with all this other stuff. I'm not saying we want to go for anything Disney just yet, but it's, you know, Warner Brothers, they obviously prioritize the companies that make the most money for them, that can bring in the most stuff. So it's kind of like we want to make sure we're not forgotten. So we're like, how do we really put our stamp on this and kind of keep expanding what Tweeterhead is? And I know there was you know, when he announced he was working with me and hired me, I know there's a lot of traditional Tweeterhead fans that were like, oh no, Dave's gonna come in and remove like Superman's red trunks from his blue pants and
Who's saying that?
Deathstroker and you know, whatever.
Speaking of Superman, I'm just going to throw this one up on the screen while we're chatting here. This is the latest Superman from Tweeterhead.
Yeah.
I take it you were involved heavily with this one.
Yeah, it was Chad wanted to eventually redo, like when we were talking about kind of like what we call like Tweeterhead 2.0. It was kind of like we could start out right away with like pieces that he hasn't done yet. Like I know a lot of people are disappointed we didn't start with Flash or Aquaman because those are kind of like the ones that are missing from the Superpowers collection. Mm-hmm. But we want to find a bridge between classic Tweeterhead collectors and then new people. So we're like, we have to just kind of revisit the Trinity and pepper in some of these pieces we've never done before. So start with like the strong ones.
Who sculpted this one?
This was designed. So I co-designed this with Guillermo Barberio, and he was the sculptor on this. So he did the majority of the work on this. I just kind of like helped. Like he sent me the file. I did some like slight tweaks, but that was like 99.999% that guy. He's awesome. So he was.
That is a great looking Superman.
Yeah, one thing you can definitely see this is, I'll say advanced from the previous Superman or the previous style, but it's still very much Tweeterhead style. Mm-hmm. It looks like it came right off the page of the comic books. Yeah, you know. But I think like a lot of the industry is going towards, well, we got to add texture, we got to add this, we got to add switch outs and this and that. And Tweeterhead seems to be like, no, this is Superman. This is the Superman we've had for 80 years. Here you go. And people love it. And this is a really good one.
It felt good when this went up finally, because I was just like, you know, there's all this feedback online and like noise in the air of like, what's it gonna be? Is it gonna be like this, that? Like, is Dave gonna screw it all up? And it felt good to like, I want to make a classic Superman for Tweeter. Like, I came on to help Chad expand the Tweeterhead fan base, not like disenfranchise the original group. You know, I want to like make them happy, help make them happy, and help bring in new people, hopefully. And give you what, you know, Chad and I really want to do with like 99.9% of DC pieces we're doing.
So it's interesting. I'm sorry, just because I don't want to forget. So your role with Tweeterhead now is similar to your role with Sideshow at the beginning. You know, helping them grow, drawing some of the talent in, and kind of fine-tuning some of their work so it's more presentable to the fan base. It's very interesting that it's kind of, again, you're coming full circle, but this time with a lot more experience.
Yeah, in a way, I'm not doing it. So when I say like design, it wasn't so much like me drawing on pencils, more like Chad had an idea of what he wanted to do with Superman. Guillermo did the first pass at it, and then I came in and helped do some ZBrush edits, some Photoshop overs to present the idea. It wasn't like in the you know, good old days where it's like, here's the idea, then you have to do this fully fleshed out design first, and then you sculpt that. It was like we're working with a sculptor who's a great visionary themselves. It's like, let's let them bring their vision to the table, and we can help refine it if needed and push it forward. And Guillermo is awesome.
You know, one of the things that I noticed, and maybe this, I imagine it's by design, you know, one of the first things I noticed about Tweeterhead pieces is that you're not shy to use very bright colors. Yeah, you want it to feel like it pops right out of the comic book. When you look at the, you know, well, I've got to say it, but when you look at what some of the other companies are doing, their colors tend to be more muted, filled with shadow, you know, gritty.
Yeah.
Right.
There's an audience for that. You know, it's kind of like,
right.
You're already doing that. Why repeat that in 6 scale? You know?
Right. So that's one of the things that, you know, I had noticed right away with Tweeterhead is that it's bright. It's happy. You know, it gives you a different feel when you look at it. And that's what art is. Art just makes you kind of feel. And I find that Tweeterhead's interpretation of comic books takes you back It takes you back. There's a nostalgia element to it. Whereas a lot of what people are doing nowadays, they want their own take. You know, I'm going to do Daredevil boots with ninja shoes. You know, I'm going to...
Very guilty over here. You know, I think in the past.
Hey, I
you
like
know,
those ninja shoes.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you know, I'm not a great fan of those, unfortunately. So, you know, I like it when a statue is what it's, well, you know, based on the inspiration, the original inspiration. Yeah. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you do a Superman or every time you do a Batman. There's nothing wrong with a classic look. Yeah. And I think that this is, you know, Tweeterhead came in at a time where people were ready to embrace this again.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Because at one time, this is what Bowen was doing. And then people were going like, okay, seen it, done it. You know, now we want something different, more artistic. Let's have the super elaborate bases. And I find that people are steering more away from that nowadays and are embracing what Tweeterhead is doing more. So this is great. It's perfect timing. You got your finger on the pulse of what the fan base is looking for now.
Sometimes...
Actually,
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that, just talking about the fans, I mean, and how they can often be so divided. I think when it comes to this statue, it was just universally praised online.
It felt great. I mean, there's definitely a couple people like Fortress Solitude Base, been done a million times. Like, I think there's one comment. It's like, I want to see someone do a cornfield. It's like, I get it. Like, yeah, Kansas cornfield would be cool. Never been done before, but like. So we're trying to give people like, if you don't own a Superman, this could be the one. Superman.
Yeah.
So people online here in the comments are saying the same stuff we're saying. You know, they're very excited about the Tweeterhead pieces, and you know, the DC line is getting pretty robust now. They're adding a lot more characters. I mean, they did the Martian Manhunter. I mean, nobody wants to do that guy.
Nobody wants to do that guy.
Yeah.
And someone just said, you know, they hope that Tweeterhead does Power Girl. And let me just go on record saying, if they're not doing Power Girl, it's David Igo's fault.
Why?
Because anything that goes wrong is David Igo's fault.
I mean, obviously, you know.
Here's another one, Dr. Fate. I mean, if anyone's going to do it, it's going to be it'll be Tweeterhead, I think. I mean, because they've shown that they're willing to tackle some of those B and C and D characters.
And it's affordable, right? Like, I've been really surprised by the price points.
Yeah, I mean, like, unfortunately, like, just prices are going. I mean, we're still not sure what the price is going to be exactly on Superman. That's part of the reason why. I think it was supposed to go up this week or next week, and we had to push it out a week. I forgot the dates exactly, but because
it's supposed to be up today. I was hoping we were going to have more than the one picture to show.
Yeah, sorry, I was too.
Hey,
we'll
wait for the gallery next week. I think everyone's looking forward.
There's a little extra bonus that's going to go with it too. That should be like hopefully worth the wait. But part of it's that, part of it's the pricing, and you know, shipping is going up too. It just there's so many things like that are out of our control. So we're trying to like, how do we still make this affordable? I mean, the great thing again is we are a small operation. We don't have like this like building and, you know, tons of like overhead, super small overhead. And we definitely like the thing I appreciate about Chad, he really wants like pass that as much as he can onto the collectors, not like price gouge or anything where, you know, I get it. Like you could price gouge and get more money and invest that more in the future of your company and stuff. But Chad's like, do whatever we need. We try to get out of this, but at the same time, we're not, you know, trying to drive like Ferraris or whatever. Like,
well,
I'd be scared driving a Ferrari. But.
Yeah, well, it helps that the team is small, so there aren't a lot of, you know, hands in the pie. So, you know, what do you think? Is it time to go to Masters of the Universe?
Yeah,
I think so. Let's just
there we go. Oh, wait.
Here we go. This is from my personal iTunes playlist, so I'm a big fan. Yeah.
Oh, you have the sword. Dang it.
Okay, so we're gonna talk some Masters of the Universe here.
You want to compare toys? I think you're gonna have some competition, David.
I got one that I'll show later.
Cool.
Because I gotta make my own suggestions for the line because but let's just kick things off. I mean, Masters of the Universe, I think you know, for me anyways, was huge growing up. So let me just get the photos ready here.
Chris, can I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
What year were you born? Are you like an early 80s kid or mid 80s?
82, yeah.
You're just a year old? Yeah, we're about the same age then. Yeah, I'm 80. I was early 83, so.
There you go. So we're from the same generation then, and I mean, so you and I probably spent hours looking at something like this.
Yep.
In the Sears catalog,
Look at that.
just being insanely jealous of that kid right there. Like,
Yep.
look,
Damn.
he's got Snake Mountain.
That
He's got,
And he must have the
Castle
best
Grayskull.
mom, right?
Yeah, and so, and I still look at that kid and think, man, that looks awesome. Like today. So, I mean, this is a huge part of me growing up, and you, I think, are a big driver of this license. And went from your time in Sideshow to now in Tweeterhead, and we'll get to the Tweeterhead side of things in a minute. I'll just kind of flip through some of the photos.
Memory lane. Let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, you obviously you kicked the line off with Sideshow with He-Man and Skeletor. Why not? I mean, what's it like? Like, you get to redesign. Like, did you ever think when you're a kid, like, man, I'm gonna redesign He-Man and for a living and get paid for it?
No, that was a weird one because, man, that was at the time. It was like, you know, Sideshow was Star Wars, Marvel, DC, Alien, Predator. I think those were like the main big one. Like, I think Terminator was still being worked on then too, but it was like post Lord of the Rings, and you know they weren't really expanding with like smaller licenses. I think at the time, and so I was screaming like, we should do He-Man for like a long time, and my boss told me, like, no, because and Tom would joke about it to this day, but you know, he used to when He-Man was big, he was working at Toys R Us at the time. He was of the age where he could work, and I'm a little younger than Tom, so I was a kid. And so he was at Toys R Us, and he just, like, all the kids were, like, there to, like, get G.I. Joes and He-Mans, and it was kind of like this weird time where he's like, it was, these nerds, you know, kind of a thing. And it was fun, like, for a long time. It was something I always joked with Tom about. And eventually he's like, all right, if you can find an artist that can convince me you can make He-Man and Skeletor look cool, I'll consider it. And so
you wore him down.
They always looked cool.
Yeah, so I know, but like it was a fun challenge. It was like, it was cool. It's Tom like throwing it out there, a little challenge. I'm like, all right, challenge accepted. So I went online and I found this artist that I really admired that I didn't know him, never worked with him before, but Cievic. He's somewhere on the other continent. I forgot exactly where he's from, but he's awesome. He did all this awesome, like, kind of comic booky, hyper realistic reinterpretations of He-Man because he's same age as us. Mm-hmm. And I just hit him up. I'm like, hey, you know, I have an opportunity. I have a little bit of a budget. Can you help me redesign Skeletor? And he's just like immediately hit me back, and we're talking. And probably 2 weeks later, he had a piece of art for Skeletor. I showed Tom, and Tom's like, oh my God. And that was like the beginning of it was changed a little bit from there to like final sculpt, but that was basically like the inspiration for Skeletor. And then he's like, all right, now make He-Man look cool, because that's going to be impossible. And I was like, all right, hey, Stephen, let's make He-Man next. And so He-Man just made him like a blonde.
Why would he say that? Why would he say he didn't think it would look cool?
It was just a joke. It was more like, I mean, he's a shirtless dude with a harness. You know, it's like just like buff white guy, you know, with blonde hair. It's like, right. I think in his mind, I think he was more of like a Conan fan, and obviously like He-Man's, you know, inspired by Conan, and was the response to, you know, Mattel needing something to compete with Star Wars toys. So I think, for a lot of people that were a different generation, I think it was
that's exactly it.
And stuff like that.
You know, like, I'll just give you a quick note. Like, for example, my generation, like, we could never get into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It just never worked. Yeah, no matter what you did with them, no matter how awesome the movie was, it could never get.
I was just a little bit too old to get into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That was the generation a little bit younger than me. So when you started off with the Masters of the Universe at Sideshow, your intention was to add a bit of realism to it, right from the bat. That's what you wanted.
Yeah.
Can you give a tiny bit sort of behind the info of like why it was fifth scale and not quarter scale? Like, how does that come into play?
I think at the time it was like, I mean, I think the basic math of it at the time was, we rounded up or down or whatever, but I think a quarter scale character, like a normal superhero, we were doing like 18 inches for like, even that's 6 foot, and you know, I forget what that is in meters for you guys, but or centimeters or whatever.
We work in feet too.
Yeah.
Height and weight is still feet and pounds. Yeah.
So it was 6 foot, so it was 18 inches, and for like a fifth scale, it was like 14 and a half. We rounded up to 15, but that's like, with the base, with this, and we kind of looked at like at the time because there's a lot of like up to the last second because we made these the first two digitally. We almost made them quarter scale, and then they're like, you know what? If we want to make this is a little bit riskier for us because it's not. We don't have all these like sales data at the time for like they did for Marvel and Star Wars and DC. And they're like, you know what? We can lower the price a bit because a lot of it is. It's not. A lot of people think a lot of it's because of like the mass of the resin, and that's variable a little bit, but it's mostly the box size. Like how many boxes can you fit like on a container?
Okay.
And if you go from like a quarter scale and your box is like 28 inches or 24 inches, and fifth scale is like 18 inches, you can fit that many more boxes.
I got it. So it has to do with like margins and what you can make. So I always thought that it was the actual licensors that sort of had a say in that. But
The what?
you're saying
Sorry, what was
The
it?
licensor.
it was actually like the licensors that had a say in the scale, but you're saying that it's more of the margins and the sort of the
A lot of
finance.
times, yeah. So yeah, you are correct. Where a lot of times, if you want to go to like Marvel or DC, you have to pitch a very specific size, scale, price point. And at the time, we were dealing with He-Man through Universal at the time, and they're very open. They're just kind of like this category. I think it was a price-based category, so it might have been like this dollar to this dollar.
Okay.
I can't exactly remember, but we had a little bit of freedom to kind of like figure out what size we wanted to do. And we looked at it and we're like, we kind of had like a table set up, and we're like, all right, we can either set up like 3 quarter scale pieces and sell them for this much, and it's this risky, or we can make like 4 or 5 fifth scale and sell them for like this much, and maybe make it a little more successful. So we're like, oh, fifth scale looks cool. I don't know if they did fifth. I can't remember if fifth scale was done up to that point. Oh yeah, Comic-Cats, like Marvel Comic-Cats and stuff like that. So it was like quarter or fifth kind of a thing. So
I think the Sideshow She-Ra was quarter scale. Is that right?
It's fifth scale. Yeah.
It was
all
fifth scale?
part of the same
Okay,
line.
I stand corrected.
Culture Shock, made a quarter scale, like off the cart, like Filmation show, and they also did the like their He-Man and Battlecat, which is like realistic. So
Right. So you started the line with Sideshow, and then you move over to Tweeterhead. I don't think it's a big coincidence that like very soon after, bam, we get
Look at that.
it was actually a long it was a long time in the making working on this Hordak piece. It was actually the first 4 pieces, which was He-Man, Skeletor, Evelyn and She-Ra, and Evelyn variant, so 5 were underneath the Sideshow license, and then Chad came in like probably 4 or 5 years ago. I forgot what it was, probably like 4 years ago, and I ran him in the waiting room, and he had some stuff there, and he wanted to make He-Man product. And he was going to maybe continue on the quarter scale Filmation line that Pop Culture Shock was doing, because I think Jerry at the time was going to stop at a certain piece, and Chad wanted to make it, but Chad kept talking about like the pieces we were making. And at the time I knew like we were kind of finishing our last one, and I'm like, I don't think we're going to make too many more. And he's like, I want to see if there's a way I can kind of work with Sideshow on this. So Orko was done underneath Sideshow's license in a creative collaboration with Tweeterhead, and then Hordak was going to be the next one. So Hordak took a while to kind of like figure out what we're going to do with it. By the time like the design and sculpt was complete, Sideshow's license had expired, and then Chad had to pursue the license himself. And Sideshow was cool with me helping Chad kind of continue the line so long as I did it in my after hours. So I was like during the daytime working Sideshow, and then a couple hours here, a couple hours there. After hours, I was helping out Chad with kind of like getting this license, getting this Hordak produced. So by the time, he had the license, and it was this weird timing when I left Sideshow, we had a finished prototype and we were able to kind of like put it up for sale. So it was just like, it was all weird coincidental timing. But yeah, so there's a bit of an overlap with Sideshow.
But Hordak's was one of my favorite figures growing up. I loved that guy. So to see you do a Hordak, I mean, that's great. So you finally somebody else other than Skeletor as a villain. And then you follow it up.
He's a big fifth scale. We made him so like if He-Man were standing up, Hordak would be like a half a head or a full head taller than He-Man. We want him to be like really imposing. So that was real fun to work on.
And then you got the Minion here. Now that's sold separately, or is that a part of the Hordak?
It's sold. We wanted to sell them with it, but we actually started the design like literally at like once we had the finished prototype. I think we started the design for Hordak's Minion like literally a week before Hordak went up for sale. So there's like we could delay Hordak and put him up for sale 3 months later, or we could just put up Hordak now, sell him as a separate thing, and we want to make him like a nice meaty piece too. So like to include him with Hordak would have been like a way bigger box, but we could have done maybe a like deluxe.
I like the how you guys you're redesigning it, you're modernizing it a little bit, but you always give a little bit of a classic look to one of these portraits, like you had with Skeletor. You got this one here. Looks a little bit more like the figure that I remember having as a kid. So very cool.
He-Man, the Motu universe is very bizarre because there's characters like one of my favorites is Merman, but even as a kid, you have the original comic version, which looked one way. You had the action figure, which looked one way. And then you had the cartoon, which looked a different way. So you had 3 different versions of Merman. And you're just like, what's the most popular Merman? Hordak, you have the cartoon version where he's blue. Then you have the comic where he's gray. And you change colors in the comic. Then the toy was gray. And you had different heads. It's like, so it's cool. Like with Hordak, you had an opportunity to do like, here's modern monster head, then here's the classic like more robotic style head from the cartoon. So
just to throw it out there, because I'm looking at a lot of the comments and they're going through every single character of the show. Is the plan to do as much of the line as possible, or is there like light at the end of the tunnel type of thing? Or
nope, Chad and I have every intention to keep this going as long as like the money makes sense. Mattel lets us keep doing it. Like unless there's a day where like they just stop selling completely and we can't justify it, then that's where we have to kind of like reevaluate. But right now we have a great relationship with the licensor, which is awesome. We have a passion for the product and or for the characters and content. And then Hordak was I think it was at the time Chad's 3rd best-selling piece of all time. Like it was did like
it looks fantastic. Like I was this close to getting it, but I'm out of space. So
it's a lot.
Who's your favorite character from the Masters of the Universe?
It fluctuates. I love Merman is probably because I love like creatures and sea creature stuff. I love Trapjaw. He's cool. Skeletor is killer. Scareglow is like a glow in the dark skeleton buff man, guys. That's awesome. I love the ridiculousness of Snout Spout. He's the mechanical elephant head guy. I love the bright, colorful bad guys though. Those are my like Clawful, Whiplash, Web Store, like getting all those weird color variations and like
I know every single one of these. I had
every single one.
Oh
and
God.
So Chris, who's your favorite?
I will show my favorite in a bit. I just want to get because you guys have announced a couple more pieces coming under this license.
Yeah,
we got the Skeletor life-size bust.
I'm so excited for this one. So excited.
So this one was started after you joined Tweeterhead, and so you've kind of worked with this one right from the get-go. What's it like working on a bust compared to the figure? Like, is it completely different design process for you, or
in some ways it's easier, in some ways it's harder. Like it's easier because you don't have to worry about like the figure pose. You have to worry about like, is he looking this way, or whatever. But you don't have to worry about like overall like big compositional pose stuff. You don't have to worry about props or things, unless you do like what I think Elite Creature Collectibles do, like Freddy with the hand, or like the Queen Studios where they give him one arm. But with this one, we just did it kind of like a classic, like shoulder to shoulder bust. So that makes it easier on the design in one way, but then it's harder because you want to make sure you're justifying the cost of a life-size bust. Like when it blows up, you want to make sure that detail translates. It has like, it just can't take like a fit scale file and just blow it up and be like print. I mean, you could, but I think people would kind of like realize it, and some things might not hold up as well.
Yeah,
so,
looked like you cut corners.
That's some of the difficulty, is kind of like making sure that works. And then this is Chad's first life-size bust, and when we're looking at like the box size, he's like, oh my God.
But that's what it is.
Yep.
There's no way to escape the size of a life-size bust without it being life-size.
This thing is not cheated down. Like I could probably put the head, like I could probably fit and I have a big head. I could probably fit my head inside of his like head. Kind of like we wanted him to feel imposing. Like he's a meaty guy, and I'm super proud of what Emil Carfong, who designed and sculpted it, and kind of like I helped him out like with some armor elements and stuff on it. But that guy put in so much effort and it, like blood, sweat, and tears, and like his soul into this piece because he wanted this to be like the best Skeletor ever made. Like that was our goal. It was like, how do we make sure when people buy this, they think that's Skeletor, that's definitive Skeletor. It's like what I remember as a kid, obviously if you hold your action figure up next to it, it's not going to look the same, but it's like it evokes that. And
Yeah, you have to, has to bring back the memories, just like I said, the Hordak does for me with that exclusive head. It's great.
that's awesome, man.
David, just a quick question. Sorry, because I don't want to forget.
Yeah.
David, is there any plan to become available through Diamond so it gets to the comic shops, or is there or is it really order through Tweeterhead website or Sideshow website?
So our main effort is like direct sales, obviously, because that's best for Tweeterhead. So we're putting a certain amount up on the front end there. I think Chad's best relationship with distribution is Sideshow, so that's his second priority. Then after that, it's kind of like if Sideshow can meet all the his financial needs, and it's kind of like it's easier to focus there.
Yeah.
Diamond, Chad. I think every company has unique, fluctuating, kind of results with Diamond, and he's had a lot of great success with Diamond too. So I think it's a matter of it's not really my call. I'm not involved in that side at all. So I know Chad talks about different variables every day. It's kind of like sometimes you look at what's happening, and sometimes companies can only buy 8, and it's that's 8's helpful with something, but sometimes the effort and time put into just getting 8 over there versus focusing on this doesn't make it worth the time. So it totally depends. So
okay, so
here we go.
Piece that just announced, it was last week maybe.
Yeah,
Tila. So she's continuing the line. I think she's an obvious choice. A lot of people probably expecting a Tila. You can't have He-Man without Tila.
Yeah.
So this again looking like another modernized version, but that's that's Tila right there. So
who's sculpting this one?
That one, it was definitely a team. Igor Kato started her, and then we had
sorry, Chris.
No, Igor Kato started the sculpt. We had Alejandro. I'm gonna slaughter some of these names. I love them, but I never have to moist type them. But Alejandro Pereira is he helped out on the piece too. And then this new sculptor we started working with, Ariel Ramis. I forget his last name. He's been awesome. He's been super helpful too. So it's kind of like a tag team between a bunch of different artists, kind of tweaking things, helping things come together. We didn't want to rush her. At one point, she was supposed to come out originally in December, and Chad and I just were feeling like we needed to push some elements a lot more. So we just want to make sure we took the time. So we took an extra 2 or 3 months. I think she's going up in. I don't know if I could say, but I think she's going up before
before the summer,
or April, kind of a thing. So yeah.
soonish, we'll say.
Yeah.
So you got He-Man, Skeletor from the old line, Orko, Evil Lyn. We got Hordak, Tila. I would expect a Beastman or something, Trapjaw, some of the more the Minion type of villains.
Yeah.
But my favorite growing up was always the Snakeman.
Yep.
Okay. And the number one Snakeman.
Here we go.
King Hiss right here. This guy, he's got the swap. You could have swapped out torso with all the snakes. This guy was the best figure growing up. This is the newer version, but the old one, remember you could peel off his skin. There were snakes underneath.
Chris, I can't see. Is that the 2000X or the Classics one?
This is the Classics one.
Cool. Sweet.
Yeah, it doesn't. My camera won't focus if I hold it closer. But
no, it's cool. You're just his heel is so big on the screen. You're this little thing. I was I think that was the Classics one. So
here, hang on.
No, King Hiss is. I love that one. I love the battle armor version of him too. I think is really cool. But yeah, King Hiss is great.
Yeah. So I had to throw that out there. That was my favorite figure. We already asked you. You liked Merman and those guys. So
well, I have a second question though. I have a second question for you guys, specifically for Chris and Dave.
Yeah.
So there's so many iconic franchises during the 80s. What made this your guys' favorite franchise? Because we had Transformers, G.I. Joe. What makes the Masters of the Universe? What made you guys gravitate to the Masters of the Universe when you were younger?
Chris, you go first. I'll follow you.
Just 1 sec here.
Skill test. Well, in that time, it was also Transformers, right? The Micronauts.
Transformers. I grew up in the 80s too, and
it had the greatest theme song ever. To start the show, this was amazing. The opening sequence, I have the power. It was just so awesome, and I never had the Transformers cartoon. I don't know what channel that was on. I didn't have it. So it was He-Man, and that's what I had. And I remember one day, my cousin walked over to my house and he had this garbage bag full of hand-me-down toys. It was full of He-Man and like Castle Grayskull, and it was like the greatest day of my life. You know, and like, still way up there.
Chris, who was it? You said your neighbor or your cousin or who?
My cousin. Yeah, my cousin.
Dude, we're so all right. So I got my first. I mean, I had some toys growing up, but like my big one was I got a box from my cousin. My aunt gave it to me because her son outgrew them.
Yeah,
he gave me this giant box. They're all missing parts and things. But I remember me and my brother opening this box, like it was like opening up the Ark of the Covenant, just in a good way, you know, not in a bad want to kill you way.
I had Castle Grayskull in there. It had none of the accessories in it, but it had the folding thing. And man, I'd make these little setups and like set the guys all up, and I'd get my dad to come look at them, and then take it down and start a new one. It's like it was such a great. I loved those toys.
I think for me, it was like, I mean, I love all the 80s properties. I'm not as big, like G.I. Joe was cool. I actually had a ton of the 3 3/4 inch G.I. Joe figures growing up. But I think He-Man stuck with me the most because I think my influences like go through ebbs and flows. Sometimes I'm like, Lord of the Rings is the greatest thing ever. The Matrix is the greatest thing ever. But I think I always kind of come back to my roots, which is like bizarre creature stuff. And I love this, like, I drew buff dudes for a long time because of learning how to draw Batman. I think that kind of like reinstilled kind of like the whole, like, this is why He-Man meant a lot to me. It was like, it was the space fantasy Conan barbarian meets creature design, wacky weirdness with sci-fi isms, but wasn't heavy on sci-fi. It was all just like, nothing made sense, but it looked cool, you know?
Yeah.
And there's something really special about that. Now that's why, like, I love Thundercats. To me was another big one with just like cat people and lizard armies and this.
Nothing made sense as well. Like it didn't make sense of exactly, the timeline and.
It didn't matter.
Yeah.
It did, like you said, it didn't matter. It just had to look cool, and it looked cool.
Yeah,
you know.
I mean, it's called He-Man. Like what? What kind of name is-
Did you guys watch that?
You know, man, he-man, he-man, man. You know, it's like
Did you guys watch the documentary, the Toys That Made Us?
oh yeah.
And
well,
then they had the episode on He-Man, and then how it got created, and they did a focus group, and they found that boys loved, they just wanted the power. Boys, I want the power, and that's how they started to develop that particular franchise. It's really, really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so cool. And I love Ninja Turtles. I love Silverhawks. Like Silverhawks is one of the best cartoon intros ever too. And that show is completely unwatchable now. Like I tried to go back and rewatch old cartoon episodes of Silverhawks. I'm like,
It's not good.
Made this? Like what?
Yeah, sometimes it's hard going back.
But it's a huge part of like what you remember. Like for some reason that stuff clicked with you, and it's not about the quality. It's like what it inspires you to want to like, what makes you happy, and you know, it makes me want to create more toys and more statues and write silly fun fan fiction. Like I write some fan fiction, so it's like cool, like what could be kind of stuff. And you know, like going back to the sideshow with why we like want to do He-Man, Skeletor, that led to Ninja Turtles and Thundercats and the Voltron too, is we try to design all those, like, what do you remember it feeling like as a kid? Not like here's an exact translation of it, but like this is kind of like that, but evolving, growing up, and kind of like what I would or what we would want to see in a film. You know, kind of like a lot of times, you know, you see designs come out for feature films. They're like, why do they redesign that? Like statue people, right? Collectors. There's like, why'd you redesign this? Why'd you make it different? But it's kind of like, what would translate from this to like the big screen or, you know, small screen or like
You're
Game
just
of
kind
Thrones or
of
Lord of the
taking
Rings.
what we all imagined in our own heads and putting it on a statue, basically, right? And like they
You
turned
know,
out amazing. So
I want to share one thing. You know, I'm a little envious of, you know, the kids that grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and I'll tell you why. Because a lot of what you grew up with, right, is coming into statue form. They're being revisited, and they're being introduced to a new generation. You know, I grew up with shows like The $6 Million Man. I don't know. Do any of you know what that is?
I've heard of it.
Okay. So, you know, that's just not being revisited. You know, you don't see people saying there was talk that they were going to make a new movie, but they were going to call it The $6 Billion Man. Because, you know, but yeah, so that was the generation of, you know, kids growing up in the 80s and the 90s. It was a great time because all sorts of industries in the medium were expanding and growing. It was just prior to the internet,
I think a huge part of that too is probably like in the toys that made us. So much of it was a response because of like Star Wars, and they saw like the Star Wars toys boom, and they're like, we need toys like that. And I just, there were toys obviously before Star Wars. There were plenty of toys, but I think they didn't really know that like franchise merchandising could be that big of a moneymaker until Star Wars.
More than the actual film. It makes more than the actual film. And
they did try.
Yeah.
They did try. Like, we would have the Batmobile, we would have the line of superheroes, but nothing like this.
Yeah.
If you ever saw a line of toys, it was 6 or 7 figures. Say 2, that's all. But nowadays, with Star Wars also starting with that, the line would be what? 300 different action figures?
Yep.
There wasn't anything like that in the 70s and the part of the 80s.
Well, I think part of the reason why all these 80 franchises are being revisited is because all the kids from the 80s are grown up, and now we can afford all the. This is what we want. This is where we want to put our like disposable income in. I can just speak for myself, right?
Yeah.
Now I'm grown up. I watched these when I was a kid. I watched all these cartoons, and now with my disposable income, this is where I'll put my money in because, like, the nostalgia sells, right?
Yeah, and that's
absolutely.
And
hold on,
range changes.
To add to what you're saying, Gina, where a lot of people from just generation right before yours, which would be mine, they buy original artwork. This is where their disposable income goes, because that other stuff that you're talking about is just not really available to them. So it's interesting.
So speaking of nostalgia and 80s and 90s, we'll take a look at some of David's favorite projects over the years, and a lot of them are related. So let's throw the first one up here. We got, of course, Ninja Turtles. We already mentioned.
All right.
That. So this is like a complete revamp, sort of realistic take on the Turtles. So just can you explain what you're going for with this line here?
All right. What makes it your favorite too?
Yeah.
This is a fun one because it's kind of like, it's one of the few instances where you can do like the whole group. It's not like the Fellowship of the Ring where you have to do 9 characters. It's like Ninja Turtle. I think it's 9, but 4 hobbits, 5 other people, right? Like Ninja Turtles, like you do 4, and they had success with their previous Ninja Turtle. I think they're called Comic Cats at the time.
Yep.
And those were just being. I think the first 2 or 3 were done by the time I got hired, and they were just finishing the 4th one when I started there. And so they had some success with those, or good success, and they saw the secondary market on those were doing really good. And they're like, let's, like, He-Man's doing okay, let's do, like, Ninja Turtles. And it actually, it started as kind of like, what could we do with Ninja Turtles? Do we want to go 6 scale, like, articulated figures? Do we want to go statue? And we were like, well, we're already doing statues with I believe, I can't remember the exact timing, but He-Man was definitely a statue. I think Voltron was confirmed. I think that Ninja Turtles kind of came in right around then. Like, let's keep all this 80s early, like, stuff together. And so we just were like, screw it, let's like make this part of the statue line. So, and then
you mentioned
that aspect. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, you mentioned that you saw it was doing well in the secondary market. How much does that influence what gets made? Do you see, like, do they pay a lot of attention to that?
At that time, it was like such a smaller operation. Like, a couple of us were like, we were like checking out eBay, so like, oh, it's still doing good. And it was like, Statue was a way smaller company back then. So now secondary market, I mean, I don't know what like variables and everything everyone else looks at. I definitely keep my finger on like what the secondary market is personally. I want to like make sure that, if, hey, there's an audience for this, and if no one else is doing it this way, then we should maybe look at doing it and offering something different. We don't want to redo what we did before to take away from that. I want to kind of like do something different that could work with the He-Man and Skeletor and Voltron. So if people that love those statues, if these came out, I don't think it would really affect that in that way. You know what I mean? It would like hopefully just kind of like expand the brand, not take away from people that bought previously. So
that's always a big argument, right?
Yeah.
When the new one comes out, oh, which one's better? And then it's going to tank, and so I never really done. So here's another one you've mentioned a couple times.
Hold on, just before you go there, just about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I was just reading a comment that the people who owned them appreciated that these were made to be displayed together.
Yeah.
right? They're kind of all designed at the same time to kind of share a similar theme, and that, people appreciate that. A lot of times when people buy statues, they already have it in their mind. Oh, can't wait for Scarlet Witch because I just bought a Vision, and they kind of want them to all align with themselves. And what ends up happening sometimes is they'll have like 3 museums, and then all of a sudden there's 3 action, and they don't really kind of display well together. But the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, as we're seeing from some of the comments, they appreciated that the idea was to get them to make sense together.
Yeah, I think at the time, the other statues that were coming out were, I forget the company name, but they were based on James Jean's art, where they were on rooftops. And we're like, hey, our first statues were rooftops. They're offering rooftops. Turtles are in the sewer. Let's put them in like the sewer, their home, like their home base. And the designer that helped me kind of like helped us really flesh that idea out was JP Mavinga, and he's awesome. He was an in-house designer who helped out on Voltron too. But he knows like martial arts language, visual language too, so he helped us with the posing. He helped us with designing that environment to work, so it's like they display one way. You can swap these other 2 characters, it still work, but like all the sewer water is in the middle if you display them like the way they were designed. So it's kind of like all the sewer water is in the middle, and they have concrete on the outside, and that was real fun. So it's cool to like put them in their home base, make them all work, still make them work as standalone pieces, because to me it's always like standalone is the most important, and then making them work as a set is like secondary. Like you can't always bank on everyone buying the set. So strong standalone set bonus. So
great.
Yeah.
Cool. So here's another one, Voltron. As I said, you mentioned it a few times already. Another 80s franchise. I never had this cartoon or whatever, but I always knew what it was. And described perfectly by Deadpool's, 5 mini lion bots that form one super bot. And what's not to like about that, right? So just explain this one. Why is this one on your list?
So I was actually, it was funny, Chris, when you were mentioning about like what was available on TV. So when I was like in the I forgot what years it was exactly. I was born in Washington D.C. and then my dad was in the Air Force, so we moved to Vespa in Germany. They have an Air Force base there, so we didn't get like U.S. television. So my mom's brother, my uncle, would record Saturday morning cartoons that he had on VHS and ship them to us. So I would get these like VHS tapes, and Voltron was actually, fun weird fact, was a family owned.
Your uncle would do that for you?
Yeah.
That's like the coolest uncle on the planet. I don't know if he watches. He's gonna watch. That is the coolest thing to do for a kid.
Dude, he was awesome. So so Voltron was actually, it's owned by a family, or I don't know if it is now, but it was originally brought over to the United States by a family-owned operation in Kansas City, and my mom's side of the family is from Washington, Missouri. So it was very prominent in the U.S. and specifically locally. So it was available. So we would record Voltron, He-Man. I think when I came back to the United States, Ninja Turtles was just coming on TV. So Voltron, He-Man were like, and G.I. Joe and Transformers were like the 4 cartoons that were on Saturday morning in Washington, D.C. that he would record and send to us on VHS tape. So the fun thing that was really weird about Voltron timing too was right when we finished, I think we showed like the unpainted, like the gray one at Comic-Con, but then it was like later that year at, was it LA Comic-Con or Wizard World? I forgot what it was called, but that was like in October. And when Sideshow brought it there, that's when coincidentally Netflix announced the animated show. So it was like Voltron was buzzing, and it was just like perfect timing, and it was just really cool being at the show. I was working that show and being on the show floor and seeing people my age, slightly older, slightly younger, like just be like, Voltron, what? Just like losing their mind. And it was a great project to work on with JP Mavinga, another, like the guy who helped out on the Ninja Turtles. He helped work on this design. This was actually the first time I worked with Josh Nizzi, who does a lot of stuff for Prime 1. But when we were like, hey, we're going to do robots, I was like, all right, got to find the best robot designer in the world. And, looked up, found this Transformers art. I'm like, who's that guy? I found his website. I'm like, this guy does awesome, like, robots. I cold emailed him, like, hey, I have a opportunity to do a Voltron. He's like, awesome, let's do it. And he did the initial design. Walter O'Neill did kind of like design revisions to help kind of like flesh out some things that like were a little bit like we just needed to tweak. And then Will Harbottle just started sculpting off of that design, and JP really helped kind of like design support and flesh out some design language with Will in Sculpt, which was like imperative. JP really helped that project out.
Cool stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of secondary market, I think this one does go for pretty big bucks now. So that's always a sign that people love it.
The thing I love about that one too is I just love the pose, how like subtle it is. I didn't want to go for like a super dynamic, weird. I'm like, I just want him there with his sword and just like looking off and that's it. Just let he's so big, you don't need him to be like shoulder twisting, and it's like, dude, he's Voltron. Like, just make him look as cool as possible standing there and what the movie should look like, you know. So that was actually one of my favorite, like, working with Josh and Izzy on the front end. It was kind of like, where do you go with Voltron, right? Like, just do you do the cartoon and I was like, all right, because he worked on the Michael Bay films. I was like, imagine the Voltron cartoon show is like a 1, and if Michael Bay were to make a movie, it's a 10. I want a 4. I don't want halfway to Michael Bay. I want just shy of Michael Bay crazy. So, dude, his first pass was like 90% the look, and then Walter Neal came in and helped like flesh it out a little more, tweak the portrait. Walter did a great job with the portrait, and it was just like everyone that saw that art was like, you have to make that. It was just really cool to have a guy like Josh involved.
I like the Michael Bay the Mikey Bay scale. It's like,
we might use that. We should use that in the future for
ultra crazy robot is the Michael Bay number 10.
Right? It's just like it's like how do you begin to have this conversation? You know what I mean? It's just like how do you make it as like step back to where almost everyone can kind of get it at the same time? You know, you see the Michael Bay Transformers are great for their own thing, but in some ways you're like, I just wish I had classic Starscream that was slightly more detailed that existed in the world instead of like whatever that Starscream was. It's like, all right, this Starscream, and you know, bring it back.
So this brings me back to a question asked earlier in the show in the comments. Adam asked, and since you mentioned that you displayed Ultron unpainted and then you saw it painted, was there ever a statue where it's like, you're working on, okay, this is kind of cool, and then finally it's painted and you're like, wow, that's pretty awesome? Like, you ever get that moment?
A lot of
way better than I thought, type thing.
So I'm colorblind, so I can actually see some, like, to me, like, my colorblindness is like, if it's on the color spectrum, it feels like a line, and like you have bright green and yellows are like right by each other, they like overlap a little bit. So all my own personal art, I draw like black and white, I sculpt, and it's usually grayscale, I don't add color. So I always kind of like visualize things as like black and white, even though I see color. And working at Sideshow with some of the best painters in the world, you can really trust them, and you give them just like loose feedback, like loose direction, kind of like what I did with Josh on the Voltron, where you just say, you know, hey, if we're going for more realistic Wolverine, like they'll make him crazy bright yellow and blue, just like dial it down just a little bit so it makes sense. And they would do it, and they would always, like, sometimes you'd have to be like shiny versus not shiny, or like warm versus cool or whatever. But a lot, like most pieces, when you see them go from grayscale, I've always envisioned them grayscale, seeing them painted is kind of crazy. It's like, what? And sometimes it's like jarring because that's not exactly what you envision, and then it like really ages well, and you're just like, man, I was completely wrong. That thing looks awesome now. But I think actually Voltron was a really big one for me because it's like he has all those cats are different colors. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how is that going to work with this visual and not look silly, right? So it's kind of, and I think I forgot who did the initial paint on that, but Anthony Mestes did the final paint and kind of like brought everything together. And I think it was, I forgot who did the initial paint job, but Anthony at the time he was still the paint manager, and he really brought that thing together, and just like, I was like, that's how you make that work. And, you know, really cool.
I find that the paint, and I mean with anything, it makes or break a statue. You can have a gorgeous sculpt, but if the paints are mediocre, holy crap, it really ruins it.
Yeah.
You know?
Actually, one I'm really excited about is the new Skeletor life-size bust. That was one we worked with Tim Gore, who's one of the biggest film effects painters in the industry out here. And he's one of the best. He came, like, I've known Tim for a while because he took my ZBrush class like 6 years ago, and he's always been a really cool guy, and he does amazing work. And so I had his contact info, and I'm just like, hey, you want to paint this awesome Skeletor bust? And he honestly wasn't a big He-Man fan. He's old. He's in the like generation where he's like, when it came out, he was too old. So he's like
old, like Charles.
Yeah. But it was the same kind of thing. I just showed him all the classic Skeletor reference. I showed him the Sideshow statue, and I'm like, kind of like a bit of this, bit of this, bit of this. And first pass was like, that's great. And right now it's in Mattel approved, like Mattel submissions. I hope Mattel likes as much as I do. So we'll see. But I would say the Skeletor was a recent one where it's like,
Wow.
what?
Okay, we got one more
Yeah.
that you were a big fan of, and a lot of people will recognize this one, Thanos on the throne. It's got to be one of the more successful statues of the last few years.
Before you say anything, I don't know if you follow Statue of the Year awards and stuff like that. You know, the various pages that do that. This one was like picked by everyone. You know, it was a clear victory of holy crap, holy wow. Nothing was better than that year, you know?
Yeah, it was a huge team effort. This is definitely not like one person, one main. Like, you know, I know Will gets credit as like the main sculptor, but Justice Joseph like did the like a huge chunk of that throne, which is its own character. We talked about on the onset this thing, like we were going through. This thing has a long story, and it's really kind of cool and to see it get made. But like Thanos originally, we were like, how are we gonna make Thanos? Like everyone does them, you know, Gauntlet Up kind of a thing, and we did them previously with Gauntlet Up with the 5th scale comic cat that came with Lady Death.
Right.
When I first started, and I think XM already had theirs out, and he was kind of like arm up and holding the Cosmic Cube. And my favorite Thanos ever, like up until this one, was the Bowen one that the Shiflett brothers sculpted. I love that. So I was like. You can't beat, in my mind, the Shiflett brothers standing there one. I'm like, it's been done. A million people have done it. XM just kind of did one like that. So like, let's not try and do the same thing. And obviously, like in the collector verse, right? A lot of people like on throne. So I just had an idea. I'm like, you know what? Dr. Doom on throne is still one of Sideshow's most famous kind of grails of all time. Like, why don't we do? Thanos has this kick-ass like throne that's a spaceship. Like, why don't we do something with that? Make that badass. So, you know, I pitched the idea to the sales team, and they were a little hesitant on it. And they gave me a budget to work with on the design, and I worked with a few different designers and another designer. I'll bring him up again. It's just funny, like a lot of these projects I worked on with JP Mavinga. He designed the crap out of that throne. I'm like, all right, I want this throne to be like, this is the piece, and the Thanos is the exclusive on it. That was like how I told him how I wanted the throne to be designed, and he just came up with this. He's such a good sci-fi tech hard surface designer. He's designed this thing in first pass. It was like, that's it. We have to make this thing. And I think we designed the throne. We were doing some neutral designs of like what the costume could look like, because this was like at the peak of like Sideshow doing like costume redesigns and stuff, which I was definitely. You know, a lot of people hated it, like love-hate relationship with that stuff, right? Some pieces are successful, some pieces not as much, but it was cool to work on this Thanos redesign and then eventually sit him in the chair. So it's kind of like we did the costume, we did the throne. Will Harbottle then did like a quick mock-up of like the throne and him sitting in it to come up with like the exact pose. And a lot of it, like Will did stuff I wasn't as into, but like everyone voted me off the island. And I like, if I'm like, I'm the only one in this room of like 6 other great minds that thinks this way, like I'm the crazy one. So he did things like, and I think Martin Canal might have pitched one of these ideas too after Will did a first pass. I can't remember, but Will was definitely like, you know, this is what we got to do. I didn't really want to do this thing at first, like with his gauntlet hand, but Will pitched it, and I'm like, all right, that could be cool. And there's that famous cover. I'm like, get over here. And then he did the whole. I wanted him sitting there straight on. I just wanted this throne behind him sitting there straight on. And there's an issue about how big the box was going to be. So we made the throne smaller. And Will's like, how do we make it so it's not like he's hiding the throne? So he brought in like the twist and then the arm up and the hand crushing the skull on the opposite.
Cool. That's one of my cool
like,
features of it.
It's cool that you guys all think that. I was like, no, because then both would be crushed. He would have been pissed at some point in time. Yeah. So I was very anti-crushing skull, anti-this, anti-turning. Everyone else loved it. I'm like, all right, cool, let's do it. You know, I believe in you guys. And it's one thing that Jim Starlin, when he came to visit, and Will and I got to sit down with him for lunch and talk with him about this. he pointed all those things out as things he loved, and I was like, that's all, like that's Will and this other group.
Yeah, that's your endorsement right there.
I was very against it. I was like, but it's cool, man, you know. So it's a weird one too, because there's things that I love about this thing that I felt made it successful that weren't received as well on like other pieces. It's kind of like it's a modern redesign, and we changed a lot of stuff. Like I think Thanos' classic skirt element is like open, so you see his golden crotch plate thing, you know. And we're like, it looks weird when he's sitting there with his skirt, and you just see his crotch. So we're like, let's make it the opposite, where it's like a flap in the front and open in the sides. Added panel lines, added textures, redesigned the gauntlet, redesigned this, redesigned that. And, you know, it became, I think, one of Sideshow's best-selling pieces. And you do that on other pieces, and they're like, no, Magneto can't look like that. That's dumb. And it's like, it's in the same world. It's like it's the exact same design language applied here over here. But, you know, it's cool.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
No. This kind of piece, the Thanos piece, what made it work for a lot of people was it just exuded power. It was just power. And you can display it anywhere, and you feel this guy is just can take on anybody. Yeah. And, you know, pieces need to exude emotion. They need to exude a mood, right? Superman doesn't work if he's in a bathing suit. You know, like, I mean, it's got to exude a feeling. And that's what drew people to this piece. You know, we all know that this isn't the first Thanos piece out there. So why did this get such a draw? It's also not the first Throne piece either. It was power, and it was bold.
I think it was the first time he was on Throne after, I think Bowen did that classic one with the giant throne, because his was smaller scale, but it was the first time in quarter scale or in the larger scale stuff where he was that way. And, you know, when you look at Thanos' Throne in the comics, it changes drastically every which direction. No one drew it the same way. Even though it's the same thing, everyone drew it differently. So I think it helped that we had some freedom to bring in the skulls, which was like a nod to death, you know, because we couldn't do a pile of skulls because, you know, Marvel's like, dude, we really don't want to like push, you know, all this like super dark vision. It's like, all right, cool. Can we put skulls on the throne as like an iconic like carved space tech? And they're like, yeah, go for it. It's like, sweet, you know, and so we had a lot of creative freedom. And it was, again, like I think a lot of, this doesn't work the best all the time, but it was a lot of great minds bringing their best to the table. It wasn't just like one person's vision and, you know, kind of this is what it's got to be. And sometimes that works out great. And sometimes it's here's a nebulous idea. And this is, I just know we've done standing Thanos. Everyone's doing standing Thanos. Let's do them sitting. Let's make our new Doctor Doom premium format. Yeah. And then everyone brings their own kind of like great spices. And, you know, sometimes you get a weird tasting soup, and sometimes you get like a great tasting soup, and we had a great tasting soup. So,
well, this was one of those that was embraced from the very beginning and continues to be embraced today. So, you know, it's great to have this kind of work to be so proud of. You know, congratulations to you and the team for producing something so amazing. You know, I think we talked about this with Mark Newman because he was on the show. I don't know,
who's
32?
Mark Newman?
Yeah, a few months ago. Yeah.
A few months ago. And sometimes artists, they don't fully appreciate what it means for people to have their stuff in their home. What it means for because their artwork enriches a home. Yeah. You know, artwork is an extension of their personality. And, you know, to be able to contribute to that feeling for what, 2,000 people? I don't know how many were made. And that's quite an achievement. And I think artists sometimes don't always fully grasp what their work has meant to that many people over the years.
Yeah, it's between like how well it sold and how many houses that made it, like you said, how many homes that made it to, despite the price point. Because I think at the time, I think it was $1,200, and that's like, what? Like it was just like it was bonkers. But
and it sold out, right? So
it sold like the and that was, you know, in the days of where Sideshow would do like a low edition exclusive, and like we haven't had a for a long time. Like they would do that kind of like try and push an edition size that could like sell out really quick, and that was cool. But then, you know, as the business grows, you have to calculate things a little different, and so they just weren't sure how this was going to do, and they knew it was a high price point piece. he wasn't big in the cinematic universe really yet either. I mean, he kind of was, but he was more like the post-credit scene guy. It wasn't like, oh, Infinity War came out, kind of a deal yet. So he still wasn't like a household name like he is now. And that's why I think it was a weird, perfect stars aligning of everything. I think he was on the rise of popularity, even though it wasn't the most popular. It was a unique visual take that said a lot of things. Again, like I think the throne kind of thing brings us prestige, and the redesign, it made it feel like it was kind of from the movie, but not, and it still spoke to classic fans. And I think a lot of it too was the marketing build-up. They did a little. I think it was like they did the announcement, they did a teaser, trailer, and then oh my god, it's like the classic portrait with the big teeth. I gotta get it, kind of thing. Like,
you were bringing up that point, like oh my god, the price point. I don't know if you remember, but no one was saying anything about the price point. They saw that, for that, it's worth it. I can see where the money is being spent, so people will spend if they feel that it's worth the asking price. And $1,200 or $1,250, like you said, at that time, people were ready to pay for that, for something like that. Yeah. So, like you said, all the stars were aligned. This leads to our last topic of the day. Where do you think the statue industry is headed? Like, where are we going in the next 2-3 years? Where are we headed?
It's weird, man. I mean, like, obviously, like, digital is huge. Like, traditional is still awesome. A lot of viable. Like, I commissioned a couple people recently do traditional sculpts for me of something I can't show you. It's a personal project I'm working on that I want to actually like do a little small production run on. But it's like my own little like creature thing working with a buddy. But traditional still definitely has a place in the industry, but digital is just like obviously the J curve of digital is just blown up. It's made it so that many more artists can make art. 3D printer technology has become a lot more affordable. Everyone's buying at home like printers, printing their own stuff. So you'd be fooling yourself not to think that has to be part of the equation. Like, all right, people are printing their own stuff at home. How do you either accept that and work with it or compete with it? And then also VR and AR technology is going to be huge too. It's like, man, so many people were talking about space and how things are like, I can't buy anymore. Or like Charles, when you said you have a rule where you only have the one Spider-Man, and if you want to use Spider-Man, he's got to be a different Spider-Man, but you can't.
That's my cheat. That's my cheat rule.
But it's like we're running out of space, and I have a friend who's a big time collector, and he owns an animation studio, but he rotates out his whole collection based on the season. He kind of like, all right, during fall it's horror stuff, so he pulls everything out, puts in boxes, and it's Jason's and Freddy's and stuff. Then during the summer it's like G.I. Joe military stuff, and I forgot what winter is, but he has like superheroes and. So he has like themes, and it's like not many people can afford that because they don't have like a huge garage or storage space where they can put stuff. So I think, in the future, you're going to see a lot more like because a lot of stuff's being digitally sculpted. You got to think of like people might, want to just like pull out their iPhone or their phone or iPad and just like look like that's my collection. You just look around your house, but then you're missing the tangible element because I know like toys are tangible. Like that's a huge part of like with kids' connections and. Everything. And there's a huge part of the process that, is when you get the box, it's the excitement of opening the box and taking the styrofoam out and opening it up and putting the pieces together. So I don't think that's going away either. So it's going to be this hybrid of accepting that 3D technology is easily obtainable, cheaper, faster. You can get printers for your home. AR and VR are booming. So you have to like be ready for that, and there's a component, there's multiple components, all that stuff that's going to come into play, but it's like, who really knows, but that I think that's going to be definitely part of the equation. But for now, I think it's going back to like what Tweeterhead's trying to do with make the certain pieces classic, like the DC stuff, and then make the He-Man and other properties you might work on, like continue some lines where it's like, these are classic properties that need that modern visualization and reinterpretation. So it's like always don't just like stick to a rule just cause. You have to be dexterous and ready to like, change it up if you have to. So.
And I agree with you. I find that the future of the industry, in addition to everything that you're saying, it's no longer seen. It will no longer be seen as a high-end toy. No offense, don't shoot me.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to be seen like artwork.
Yeah.
It's going to be seen like an expensive piece of furniture. It's going to be seen like a high-end Blu-ray player.
Yeah.
And that's what I think it's headed towards.
And it's definitely been there now in a lot of ways. It's way more. I mean, like pop culture used to be like, this, you had to be a secret nerd in your basement and play D&D on the weekends. But now it's like way more like
mainstream.
Mainstream, yeah.
Really mainstream. And, you know, what wasn't cool is cool. And it's like, that's rad. And I think.
Exactly. And
I
think,
remember when I was going to school and university, like it was strange to wear a Superman shirt, or it was you know, I mean, it wasn't that acceptable. But then as the movies came out and as they got more popular or whatever, it's not strange now to walk down the street with a Batman t-shirt or an X-Men t-shirt. Now it's become so mainstream. And there you go, right? Yeah, it's became so mainstream. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you mind me asking too? Is like as a female, especially, like I think it was like nerdy stuff was always considered like a guy's thing, unless it was like Barbie or My Little Pony. But now, like even Mattel and other companies aren't calling it like boys' toys and girls' toys. They're like action figures and dolls or something. So it's kind of like anyone can play with anything. But I'm sure, like,
yeah, exactly. Anyone can. I mean, I was always into G.I. Joe, and it started with the Saturday morning cartoons. So that was me in the morning. That was my golden hour. You know, and then Star Wars, obviously, and that's really how I got into the geek. But I mean, just going to high school and even to like university, you know, you're not wearing the Spider-Man T-shirt. It was just at that time, it wasn't that mainstream to be doing that. And now, you know, I guess the fans of the 80s, now we can, you know, reap the benefits of the success of the movies and how it's become mainstream, and now sort of incorporate these things into our home. And, you know, and you know, I guess it's more money for these companies, but it also gives us pleasure, right? So
yeah.
You know, to add to a point that Gina was saying and the question that you asked about, you know, being a girl, that doesn't apply that much today.
Oh, totally.
You know,
like growing up, especially like being an 80s kid in the early 90s, I'm sure is like, now it's,
Because like my kids have been going to cons with me since they were 3 years old, and it's not at all unusual for kids, boys or girls, right?
Yeah.
You know, to like Superman. It doesn't have to just be Wonder Woman, right?
Yeah.
And you know, one of these days I'll show you a video I did with my kids, like, you know, showing graded comic books and talking about them.
That's awesome.
So it's a great time to be a boy or a girl in the industry.
Yeah.
And in terms of where the future is headed, who knows now that you have everybody included, right? The Marvel Universe, the DC Universe, it's far more inclusive now than it's ever been before.
Yeah.
It's not just white people.
Yeah.
You know, for me to just say that, right?
Yeah.
So it's far more inclusive. So it'll be very interesting where the industry is going from a cultural standpoint as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
what was unacceptable in the 80s or like 70s and 60s, like to now, it's like, you know, for like, you know, people thought Black Panther wouldn't do well because it's like no one knows who Black Panther is. He was kind of only in this one movie, and you're going to explore this whole world no one knows, and it's like boom, like it's like there's so many audiences out there. It's not the same audience. The audience is growing and is diverse too, and I'm glad they're, you know, kind of shifting gears and trying to like keep up, because they should. You know, it's like, and that's a hard thing sometimes when you work on certain properties and they're like, we need you to be like have more diverse inclusivity and all this stuff. It's like, dude, your only characters are like white people. Like what? Like make a popular character that's not that, and we'll like, you know, not saying anything specific, but just like some properties just like are lacking that, and it's like they need that, and it's always weird to like, it's cool when you see things change and evolve and be more inclusive, because you want everyone else to have the same experience like I had growing up, where it's like that's the character I like, either because I can identify with them or not, but you want people to feel like if they're not just looking at a world just only one thing that they can't relate to.
Right. People like to see themselves too.
Yeah, in the comments, Jerry is saying we love comics when comics weren't cool, and I can certainly relate to that. Like, I mean, even watching that show, The Big Bang Theory, which I think is pretty good in certain ways, but it got so popular, and I'm looking at it going, but I was into that before everyone else was into that now, you know?
Yeah.
That show really
push a certain stereotype on nerds, kind of like
They do.
American Pie pushing on band people. It's like my brother, when we were growing up, he was in band. When we watched American Pie, he's like, that's not what band people are like. And watch Big Bang Theory, and they're like, I think you'll love it, Dave, because it's about nerds. And I watch them like,
That's not what nerds.
This is like nerds from like the 70s or 80s. This isn't like so not like what it is, you know?
What it is today.
Yeah.
You know, you want to hear an interesting story. I think one of the sad parts today is that comic books aren't as easily accessible as they used to be. They used to be in all the variety stores, all the, you know, shops used to have them, and we had plenty more comic book shops. There aren't that many left. And I'm going to tell you an interesting story. I remember one time my niece stayed over, and, you know, she was up later than my kids because she was a few years older, and, you know, but it was time for her to go to bed, right? So I just handed her a bunch of comic books. I hadn't realized that she'd never seen one before.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So she's picking up a book, and then I hear her scream, Charles, what kind of a book is this? Isn't that interesting? Like, you know, what kind of a book is this? And ever since then, she's been a huge fan. So for every one of her birthdays and Christmas presents, we give her graphic novels. She doesn't want anything else.
That's
so
cool, man. Yeah.
Very cool.
I think a lot of like what now, like we're, like how you said comics may not be as easily accessible, but thank God they at least have like a million comic book movies and TV shows and like where you didn't have that back. That you had like the one big comic book movie for the next few years is Batman with Tim Burton, and like, you know, then Batman Returns is the only other one since then, and you know what I mean? Like now it's like every year you have like 10 to choose from, or 12 or 30 or whatever. So
yeah,
hopefully they come back next year or what's later this year. I've missed that in my life for the last year and a half. So, all right, I think we're about that time when we can start wrapping things up. Anybody have any last questions for David before we?
I really just want to thank David for taking all the time to answer all of our questions and, you know, being super cool for coming on the show.
Well, you're welcome, you know, because I am. I know, Charles, you talked to me like over a year ago about this, and it's cool to finally like carve out some time and, you know, talk to you guys and get to meet you guys. Because Charles, we didn't really know each other, and getting to know you and meeting Gina and Chris and B-Mother, you know, it's like, it's cool.
B-Mother.
Like, I've recognized like certain names online and never gotten to really talk to some people. And that's one great thing about the internet now and all this stuff is it's so easy to like connect and meet these people. And it's always weird thinking of myself like on that side of like, you know, the field now where it's like I work for doing this for a living. And, you know, just back when I was trying to get like a job doing this, it wasn't like you can just hit up this person on Facebook or whatever. Now you can just like, hey, you know, you'd be surprised how many people would actually get back to you, you know?
All right. So thanks to everyone who tuned in, watching, asking questions and commenting. We had quite a few people watching this show. So thanks for everyone for tuning in.
Absolutely.
Thanks, David, for joining us. I know it's an hour and a half out of your day. So thanks very much. We appreciate it. It's been a great episode. And we'll talk to everyone soon.
Thanks, guys.
Good night, everybody. All right.